Welcome back, everybody. We're breaking down UFC Fight Night, Grasso versus Araujo. And this is a pretty compelling main event, in my opinion. Definitely a bit more intriguing than the previous headliner. But yeah, solid main event here. We have a number of young fighters and prospects on this card here, so very intriguing in that regards as well. All things considered, this is a pretty solid card, in my opinion. Obviously, we have the light at the end of the tunnel here with a super stacked pay-per-view card coming up. So, not a bad precursor card to lead up to it. But we do have 13 fights to break down here. So, without taking up too much time here, let's dive right into the breakdowns for Grasso versus Araujo. All right, so this is probably not going to be the first fight on the card, but I'm just going to go off of Tapology here. And right now they have Todorović versus Jordan Wright listed as the first fight. And we have here Duško is the minus 185 favorite. Wright is the plus 160 underdog. And, I don't have too much to say about this fight. I don't really think too highly of Wright. I honestly have some serious doubts as to whether or not he's even UFC caliber. Coming into the UFC, I had some serious skepticism as to the level of competition that Wright has gone up against. I feel like his record's a bit fraudulent pre-UFC. And even in his UFC tenure, I feel like his resume overall has been pretty weak. In his losses, he's largely getting blown out of the water. The wins are pretty weak too, if I'm being honest. The win against Pickett is probably his best win, which really isn't a particularly great look anyways. And even that win, I don't know if you could take too much from, just because it did end pretty early. But Pickett also ate like 20 unanswered elbows to the side of the head, so I'm not sure if you could take too much from that performance. And then his other win was against Ike Villanueva, a very low-level guy who's not got the best durability either. So, his wins, not great. His losses, he's getting blown out in. Wright, he is pretty dangerous early in the fight. He's a karate guy who's got some power, but, beyond that, I don't even know what he's really all that good at. He did go for takedowns in his most recent fight against Marc-Andre Barrios. Showed, a little wrinkle to his game, but ended up getting submitted. So, I can't even say his grappling's any good. I don't think he's really even been tested there at the UFC level. His chin's a little suspect. He tends to wilt a bit under pressure. We saw guys, if they're able to get into his face, we see Wright, start to crumble a bit. I'd say his really only redeeming quality is that he is pretty dangerous early. He will go for the finish. But beyond that, I just don't think he's really all that good of a fighter. And he's going up against Duško Todorović, who, I'm not super high on now either. He was someone who I felt, maybe had some tools to succeed, but, his fight IQ, his tendency to rely a little too much on his head movement is, I'd say, a little alarming at this stage in his career, especially now that he's gotten 2 knockouts on his record now. I do feel that the durability is going to have to come into question a little bit. I know he still is young, and, he did get knocked out by some pretty heavy hitters, but, he's also taken a ton of damage over his last, 3-4 fights. So I'm not saying his chin's gone or anything, but I would have some concerns going into this fight against someone like Wright, who, say what you will about the guy, he is pretty dangerous early, and he will go for the finish. So against someone like Todorović, who does leave his chin out there sometimes to be touched, I wouldn't trust him 100%, but with that said, I do think that Todorović is likely the better fighter pretty much everywhere. I think Todorović he's very well-rounded. He's got pretty good boxing. He's pretty strong in the clinch, and he is a capable wrestler when he does decide to go there. We saw him, push it pretty aggressively against Njokuani. I think him being on the, skid that he is, or that he was on, he probably wanted to play it a little safe there, but still ended up getting knocked out there. But it was good to see him kind of go to the wrestling a little more, go to a more wrestle-heavy game plan. And honestly, this was a Duško Todorović that I had expected to see after the Townsend fight. I felt that Duško is a pretty well-rounded guy. He's pretty strong in the clinch. He's pretty strong on top too, but he's kind of fallen in love with his hands a little bit, and I feel like fights have kind of slipped away from him for those reasons. But after that last performance, even though he did lose, I do like that he's kind of going back to, I think, what gave him the most success, I'd say, coming like into the UFC earlier in his UFC career. And I do feel that going into this fight, that's probably what he's going to have to go to here to get the W. Wright is dangerous early, but, he has had a tendency to fall apart later in fights when opponents start to get into his face, start to make fights dirty. And I do think that Duško is capable of doing that. And I do feel that's likely his best path to victory here. I don't think it'd be a great idea to strike at distance against Wright. I feel like that'd be maximizing Wright's win condition here. So overall, I just feel that Todorović, he's the more well-rounded fighter. I think he's beaten better guys. Like, even pre-UFC, I feel like his regional wins I would rate that far higher than most of Wright's wins overall. So I got to give it to Todorović here. I think he can get it done in a number of ways, actually. I feel like, despite Wright being a bit of a kill-or-be-killed fighter, I could see Todorović winning a grapple-heavy decision. I could see him maybe getting on top of Wright and, just pounding him out too. So yeah, I could see a number of scenarios here for Todorović to get the W. So I'm going to go with him here. But official prediction, I guess I'll just go with Todorović to win by round 2 TKO. I think he's able to kind of weather the early storm of Wright a bit, get his wrestling and grappling going, and then eventually get on top of Wright and eventually pound him out. So official pick, I'll go with Todorović to win by round 2 knockout. And moving along, we have a pretty interesting fight between two grapplers in Jacob Malkoun and Nick Maximov. Maximov is the minus 155 favorite. Malkoun is the plus 135 underdog. And I don't know if I have too much to say about this one either, just because we have two guys who have a very similar style going at it. Two guys who will like to push the wrestling, two guys who could chain together takedowns and push a pretty wrestle-heavy game plan. But the issue with this fight is, we haven't really seen them go against someone with that style. I don't really know who's going to be having a bit more success, pushing, their style, who's going to be able to get on top and maintain control time. So it's kind of hard to say in that regards. Both guys striking pretty bad in my opinion, pretty underdeveloped. I wouldn't be surprised if we did see prolonged striking exchanges between the two, just because I do think that they're probably on a similar enough level that it'll be competitive. I don't think anyone's going to be blowing the other out of the water on the feet. So we could see them test the striking a little bit. But honestly, I wouldn't be able to tell you who'd come out ahead. And as far as the grappling goes, I feel like that's a bit of a wash also. We've seen both of these guys go out there and just spam takedowns over the course of 3 rounds. We saw Maximov get 11 takedowns over Punahele Soriano, rack up, almost 10 minutes of control time. We saw Malkoun go out there and get 7 takedowns against Brendan Allen, get about 7-8 minutes of control time. He did the same against AJ Dobson and Abdulrazak Al-Hassan. Nick Maximov was able to do something similar to Brundage. Had a lot better success controlling him. Didn't have to shoot as many takedowns, but regardless, both guys have a very similar style. Neither guy, in my opinion, is particularly great at controlling opponents. I know Malkoun had a decent amount of success against Dobson and Al-Hassan, but those guys just do not have much of a bottom game. Still very underdeveloped there, and Malkoun was able to kind of just lay on top of him. But we saw against someone like Brendan Allen, who is a little more proficient in the grappling, was able to hit reversals, was able to kind of reduce a bit of the control time that Malkoun was able to get off. And I do think he's going up against a pretty proficient grappler in Maximov also, who might also have a bit of size and strength advantage over Malkoun. So for those reasons, I would say that Maximov, I think, is the rightful favorite, the rightful slight favorite here. Because on paper, I think it is a pretty 50-50 fight, but I do feel that between the two, Maximov is going to be the stronger guy, the more physical guy. I feel like he's probably training with better grapplers also. He's in a room with, I'd say, more higher-level grapplers as opposed to Malkoun. He's training out of Australia. So just, I guess in terms of their pedigree, I'd go with Maximov a little bit more here. He'll also have a few more physical tools. He's going to be the bigger guy as well. So, between the two, I feel like Maximov might have better chances of enacting his game plan over Malkoun. But yeah, this is going to be, I think, a pretty close, pretty back and forth sort of grappling affair. Wouldn't hate people taking a shot on Malkoun here, honestly, because, again, on paper, it is pretty 50-50, but just in terms of the intangibles, I think it will kind of help Maximov put him over the edge here. So I'm going to go with Maximov by decision. The guy really hasn't shown too much finishing upside. He's pretty content to just hit takedowns and maintain control. He's not the most aggressive ground and pounder, or even someone who will, aggressively hunt for submissions. And I can kind of say the same about Malkoun as well. So I do think this fight likely goes to the scorecards here. Both guys, pretty good cardio, pretty good durability. Both guys can, kind of use the grappling to kind of prolong the fight. So I like this fight to go the distance, and I kind of favor Maximov a little bit more there, if it does hit the scorecard. So give me Maximov by decision. In moving along, we should have a pretty exciting fight between Joanderson, Brito, and Melsik, Baghdasaryan. I'm not sure what exactly is going on with this fight. According to Tapology, it is still on, but I don't see any lines on there, even though I was able to place a bet earlier in the week on Brito. I believe Baghdasaryan was about like a minus 175 favorite, Brito about like plus 150. I can't seem to find any odds on this fight recently, so I don't know if it's gone canceled or something, but I'll still do the breakdown anyways. But it should be a pretty fun fight, right? Because we have Baghdasaryan, who is a very aggressive striker, someone who will move forward and throw with heat. The guy definitely puts a lot of power behind his shots. He's got good knees and elbows in the clinch. He's a pretty dangerous kicker also, someone who will mix it up on all three levels. He's shown pretty good technique and volume. He does slow down a bit in fights, but he has shown he could kind of just fight through the fatigue. And, just based off of what I've seen so far, he does look pretty sharp, does seem to pass the eye test. And he's going up against another very aggressive fighter in Brito, who I'd say is a little more well-rounded, but, on the feet, Brito is someone who will move forward and throw heat also. Very good low leg kicks. The guy's got power in his hands also, and he has shown he could push the grappling a little bit, which I'd say is a significant part of his game. He has shown he's, can be pretty committed to it. That said, I don't know if he's got the cardio really to really push that sort of grappling pace, but overall, I do think he's a pretty capable grappler. It's just that, it's going to drain his cardio much quicker than if he were to just go in there and strike. But taking a look at this fight, I do think that Baghdasaryan's probably the more technical striker. He does seem quite a bit sharper in there. I think he may just be quicker also, but, I don't think there's a massive gap on the feet. I think Brito's a pretty dangerous striker as well. Someone who will kind of go in there and throw with heat. I'd say his, combinations and his overall striking's a little more basic, but, it still is very effective. Both guys do look to finish in there, so I can see either guy getting clipped, honestly. But overall, I do kind of favor Baghdasaryan a little more on the feet, but I do think Brito is going to be the more well-rounded fighter. Baghdasaryan has shown pretty good takedown defense and get-ups, so I don't know if Brito will have a ton of success, hitting takedowns and, getting control time. But I do think it's something he could maybe mix in to kind of give Baghdasaryan a few different looks so that, Brito can kind of open up his striking a little bit too. And I also think that Brito is a good enough striker that he doesn't need to really telegraph, his takedowns. He doesn't have to be as predictable as someone like Kurt Anglin when he's going in for the takedowns. But I do have some concerns on the Brito side, especially the cardio. Like I was saying before, he does tend to fall off a bit, especially if he's pushing a grappling pace. But on the other side of things, I don't think Baghdasaryan's got the best cardio either. We did see him slow down a bit in fights. He was able to dig deep, but I'd say for this matchup, they're on a pretty similar level in terms of the cardio and the cardio dynamic. Obviously Brito had that performance against Algio where, he was pushing the grappling heavy early, was having a bit of success there, but afterwards just became a completely ineffective fighter. The movement became way more labored. He was getting way more hittable on the feet, but Algio, I think has got much more proven cardio. Definitely one of the guys in the division with, I'd say, higher end cardio there. And it's not like Brito completely death gassed in that fight either. He was still thrown with heat in that second and third round. He was still able to get the respect of Algio in that second and third round. Like, he wasn't completely useless in those latter rounds. It's just that the pace and the output and pressure of Algio just was a little too much for Brito to keep up with. So ultimately, I just feel like this fight is going to be a pretty close affair. On the feet, I think both guys are going to have moments. I do favor Baghdasaryan on the aggregate if, it's a 100% stand-up affair, but I do think that Brito can swing it with the grappling. I don't think he's going to, just go out there and spam like 7, 8, 9, 10 takedowns, but I do think it's something he could kind of mix in along with the striking to kind of close out rounds. And on top of that, Brito's, a pretty aggressive fighter on the feet. I see him getting in the face of Baghdasaryan, not giving him too much space to throw those kicks. And Brito's a pretty good leg kicker himself. We did see Baghdasaryan struggle a bit with the low kick. But yeah, Brito, on top of that, I think is the more well-rounded fighter. So I feel like this is going to be a pretty close fight. So I'm going to go with the dog here in this one. I'm just going to go with Brito by decision, I think. A lot of people probably think there's going to be a lot of violence in this fight. And I kind of expect it to be pretty violent early. I do expect a bit of a car crash early, but I think both guys have shown pretty good durability. So I can also see this being maybe a pretty back and forth sort of war where both guys, maybe they're hurt at one point, but, they're able to kind of tough it out. And this kind of ekes to the over, goes to a decision. And if this hits the cards, I feel like there's a good chance we see Brito maybe have had some success mixing some of the wrestling. So I'm going to go with Brito here to win a very close, very hairy decision. And next up, we have Raphael Assunção versus Victor Henry. And Henry's the minus 300 favorite. Assunção's the plus 250 underdog. And we have a pretty intriguing fight between two older guys in the division. Assunção being the more senior of the two. But we'll take a look at him first. So Assunção, he's coming off of a knockout loss. He's 40 years old. It's been almost about a year now since his last fight. So, a lot of red flags on the Assunção end, but, he is a veteran. He does have some power in his hands, but I guess, some of the issues that I've had with the Assunção outside of, the age and the durability concern now is just the fact that he's somewhat low volume. He is someone who can take the back foot, can be a little low volume at times, can be someone who is a little reliant on landing a big shot. And I feel like that's a style that doesn't age particularly well, especially as your durability and speed start to go. But on the other side of things, we have Victor Henry, who is coming off of a very dominant performance over Raoni Barcelos. A lot of people used to be very high on, but that was just a very solid performance from him. Don't want to completely overrate him just yet. I would actually like to see how Barcelos does against Jones in this upcoming fight. Obviously, if Barcelos looks good against Jones, I would put a lot more. I'd say we'd be able to take a little more from it as opposed to if Barcelos just goes out there and gets smoked by Jones, or if he just looks a bit flat, then maybe you don't want to overrate that performance. But regardless, I do think that Victor Henry is a pretty solid fighter. I said that even in the Barcelos-Henry breakdown. I was on the Barcelos side. I thought that Henry, he's a very well-rounded guy, very high pace, high output. But I felt that at the time it might have been a little too much, especially making his UFC debut, but it didn't really faze him too much. Victor Henry, a veteran on the regionals, a guy that's kind of made his rounds. He's fought some pretty good guys, regionally. He's very well-rounded. He's got a great skill set. He's able to push a pretty crazy striking pace. He's shown pretty good durability also. He is getting a bit up there in age, but hasn't really shown too many signs of slowing down. And in this fight, I do feel like he's got all the tools to succeed here. Assunção, in my opinion, a little washed at this point. I have some serious concerns as to his durability. I don't know if he could really keep up with the pace and the pressure that Henry's going to be able to put out there. And outside of Assunção landing a bomb on Henry, I just don't know if he's going to have too much success here. Henry never been knocked out before either. And Assunção, he does tend to load up a bit on his shots now. They're a little more telegraphed, and at this stage in his career, they're a little more predictable also. So I feel like he's going to have a hard time landing that bomb, and even if he does, I don't know if it's a guaranteed knockout. So I do like Henry in the spot. I see him just being able to just out hustle and outwork Assunção in the spot, maybe even get a knockout, because I do feel that with Assunção, he's getting to the stage in his career where, even a decisionator like Henry could probably knock him out. We saw Assunção, he was definitely reacting to the punches of Simone early. And I know Simone low-key might be a pretty powerful guy. Simone also coming off of a knockout win over Jack Shore. But Assunção has effectively been finished in 3 of his last 4 losses. The loss to Marlon Moraes is technically by guillotine, but he got hurt pretty badly on the feet. It was more of a club and sub scenario. Gets knocked out by Garbrandt standing, gets knocked out by Simone standing. And at 40 years old, with these knockouts, I wouldn't be completely surprised if the chin's just completely gone and someone like Henry's just, able to touch him. Either just, touch him early, clip him clean, or have a attritional TKO later in fights as the damage starts to build up. So I'm going to go with Victor Henry here. I think I'll just go with Victor Henry by knockout. I don't know if it's going to happen earlier or later in the fight, but I think he's going to be able to get the finish on Assunção here. So yeah, give me Victor Henry by round 2 knockout. And moving along, we have the meme fight of the week in Pete Rodriguez, Mike Jackson. Rodriguez is the minus 650 favorite. Jackson is the plus 475 underdog. I mean, like I was saying, this is a bit of a meme fight, so I'll keep it short. So Jackson obviously coming off of one of the more ridiculous victories in recent memory. The guy definitely did get fouled a few times, but the fact is Jackson's just not a good fighter in my opinion. Got club and subbed by a 1-0 Mickey Gall early in his career. Was honestly on his way to getting knocked out by Dean Barry, but kind of got bailed out by the fouls there. And the thing with Jackson is I just don't think he's a UFC caliber fighter whatsoever. I don't think he's really a decent regional fighter for that matter. And on top of that, he is getting a bit up there in age. 38 years old, not a UFC caliber fighter, likely not a very good regional level fighter either. I don't know what else you could say about this guy. He got bailed out in his last fight, and I doubt it's going to happen again in this fight. He's going up against Pete Rodriguez, who, probably not a UFC caliber fighter either, but at least from what I have seen, it looks like he could box a bit. He seems to have some pretty quick hands. Definitely seems like he's got some power in his hands. But again, he can't really take too much from those performances. I feel like he's really just beating up a bunch of bums on the regionals. These guys are pretty much going down, with the first punch that lands from Rodriguez. But, on the flip side of things, we're talking about Mike Jackson here, who, quite frankly, I wouldn't even say is a massive step up in competition, if at all, from the guys that Rodriguez has faced on the regionals. But with Rodriguez, he did come in short notice against Jack Della Maddalena, got completely pieced up by him, which, I don't know if you could take too much from either. We saw Jack just recently run through a veteran in Meve, so I do think that Pete probably, while not UFC caliber, should be able to get it done here. I think he should just get the round 1 knockout here, honestly. Obviously wouldn't recommend laying the juice, as we've seen what could go wrong in Mike Jackson's fight. But I'll be honest here, a lot of people talk about, banana peel pricing and variance in MMA, which I understand, but I feel like that last fight was it. That last fight was the proverbial banana peel fight that we all talk about. I think that was Jackson's get out of jail free card. Not that I'd advocate betting Pete here, but I just don't think we see Jackson pull off 2 fluke victories in a row. I don't think too highly of this Pete guy, but I do think he should be able to get his hands on Jackson and knock him out. So give me Pete Rodriguez by round 1 knockout. And in the next fight, we have Martinez versus Brandon Davis. Martinez is the minus 160 favorite. Davis is the plus 140 underdog. We'll start with the underdog in Davis first. So with Davis, the guy's typically just a junkyard dog, someone who will move forward in there and make it a scrap. The guy's striking is serviceable. Just a very kick-heavy fighter on the feet. He is capable of mixing in the wrestling, mixing the clinch work, cage push a little bit. Historically has shown pretty good cardio and durability, although you can make an argument that the durability could be slipping here, coming off of an early knockout to Baghdasaryan. But even before that, he's accumulated quite a bit of damage. Against Chikadze, he took a lot of damage. Took a bit of damage against Kyung-Ho Kang as well. Got dropped in that fight. Took a lot of early damage against Costa also. And that's just kind of the style that Davis brings to the table. One of these guys who's, able to get into the scrap and kind of just make a fight really gritty and dirty and sometimes come out ahead. But the fact is, I feel like he's taken enough damage and coming off of a knockout loss that I'd start to be a little concerned with the durability. And, he's only 32, but I feel like it's potentially starting to add up in terms of the damage. And, maybe it's something that could be catching up to him. And the reason I've kind of stressed that a bit in this fight is because he has gone up against a pretty dangerous striker in Martinez, a guy who, was a bit of a knockout artist on the regionals, but has been a bit of a disappointment, honestly, at the UFC level. I feel like the power hasn't really quite translated. I feel like overall he's looked quite pedestrian, at the UFC level. In this fight against Rodriguez, he gets caught in a submission, put on a very uninspiring performance against a 42-year-old Guido Canetti. And then against Ronnie Lawrence, he did have a few moments late in the fight, but, was a little fluky hitting that, spinning elbow or spinning back fist. But largely he was getting dominated that fight in the grappling. Did get dropped 3 times by Ronnie Lawrence also, which not a great look since Lawrence not really a power guy, more of just like a pressure wrestler, a point fighter. So yeah, I got some serious doubts as to whether Martinez is really even UFC caliber. He does have power in his hands, I will say that, but he can also kind of let fights slip away, looking to time that counter, land that big shot. So I can't really advocate a money line play on Martinez here. But on the other side, we have Brandon Davis, who his biggest asset, in my opinion, his durability is starting to slip a little bit, and he's going up against a very dangerous, very precise striker in Martinez. And lately, it does seem like Davis is slowing down a little bit, especially at 135. He does look a little lax on the feet. He doesn't really set up a ton of his kicks either. He'll throw a bunch of naked leg kicks, which with Martinez, I feel like he could potentially find something. Get the timing down and be able to land a bomb on Davis. I will say this though, Martinez looked like he was struggling a bit with the body kicks and the leg kicks of Canetti. It looked like those were kind of getting to him, but I don't know if Davis is the kind of fighter to really put that sort of heat behind his kicks like a Canetti. Because say what you will about Canetti, his age, his cardio and durability, he does seem to throw with a ton of heat, and I don't know if Davis does at that level. So I do think that Martinez should be able to walk through some of those shots, get his timing down, and just be able to find an opening to land a clean one on Davis. So I feel like this is potentially a fight for Martinez to get back on track here, go back to his winning ways, his knockout ways. So official pick, I'll go with Martinez to win by round 1 knockout. And in the next fight, we have CJ Vergara versus Tatsuro Taira. And Taira is the minus 250 favorite. Vergara is the plus 210 underdog. And we'll start with Vergara first. So with Vergara, he is primarily a striker. He's got good body and leg kicks. Showed a bit of power on the regionals, but it hasn't quite translated at the UFC level, which I'm not too surprised with. He's fought some pretty low-level guys on the regionals, and Vergara, in my opinion, appears to be more of just a scrappy volume sort of guy as opposed to, one-punch knockout power sort of guy. He did show, I'd say, some poor grappling defense early in his career. Looks like it's improved a little bit here. He was able to stuff the takedowns of Rodriguez and was able to work his way back up to the feet on a few occasions, but I feel like he's going up against a much better controlled grappler in Taira here. So I think Vergara's going to he's going to struggle a little more working his way back up than he did in some of his more recent fights. But with Taira, he is a very slick grappler on the mat. He is someone who's capable of just smothering you with his top pressure. He's got a nice back take. He's good in transition. He's coming off of a very dominant performance over Candelario, who historically has been a very tough guy to hold down, and Taira was able to control him and reverse him in certain positions. So pretty good look there, in my opinion. But Taira is also pretty good on the feet too. As we saw, he's got some power. He's got pretty quick hands. He can crack. He was able to pull off a number of finishes on the regionals, was able to knock Candelario down also. Just a very solid, well-rounded prospect. I guess the only criticism I would really have is he does start off a little slow, and he can be a bit low output. Up until that shot that knocked Candelario down, it was a pretty close affair. I mean, he was landing heavy when he did land, but he can be a little low output at times. However, he kind of makes up for it with the fact that he does have knockout upside, and obviously he is able to win moments with the power. And if he's able to hurt you, he's fully capable of just snatching up a neck or a limb and getting the submission, or just getting into a dominant position and kind of just riding out the rest of the round. But taking a look at this fight, I do think that Taira is the side here. I feel like he's got a pretty clear path in the grappling. I know Vergara did show pretty good takedown defense in some of his recent fights and on paper, but he still was getting controlled by Klitz and Rodriguez. And Vergara was grabbing the cage on a few occasions, which I think assisted him a bit. And Klitzen was also slowing down as the fight was progressing, which I don't know if is going to happen with Taira here. Taira did push a pretty insane grappling pace in his last fight and didn't really look like he was slowing down. On the feet, I kind of do favor the pressure and the pace that Vergara brings to the table. He's a pretty high volume guy. He's pretty aggressive. So if he's able to keep it standing, I do think he can make it competitive. It would be a very interesting fight. But, I wouldn't completely write Taira off on the feet either. I think he's going to be the heavier hitter. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was able to hurt Vergara standing, maybe wobble him a bit. But I do see the fight eventually hitting the ground, whether it's with, Taira rocking Vergara and kind of just jumping on him, or if he's able to just initiate a takedown and get on top of him that way. So I do think that Taira is the more well-rounded fighter here. I think he's probably the better athlete also. The guy seems, very strong, very physical for the division, for his age. So if he's able to get on top of Vergara, I see him having a good amount of success controlling him. So I'm going to go with Taira here. I think that he gets it done by decision. I wouldn't be surprised if he found the finish either, though, because, even though he went to a decision against Candelario and does have a lot of decision wins, he did come pretty close to finishing Candelario, obviously had him hurt on the feet. And, there were a few exchanges where he probably could have converted something, but Candelario just showed really good submission defense. And I don't know if that's going to hold up on Vergara's end. So, give me Taira in this spot. I guess I'll just pick him to win by decision. And moving along, we have Piera Rodriguez versus Sam Hughes. And Rodriguez is the minus 200 favorite. Hughes is the plus 170 underdog. And we'll start with the slight favorite in Rodriguez first. So Rodriguez, just a very heavy-handed striker, someone who does like to pressure her opponents. Can fight very composed in there, right, which leads her to be a little low volume at times, but she is able to make up for it with the power. And, she has shown that the power can carry late in fights as well. Cardio seems okay. She's gone the distance, but I don't think she's really been pushed all that much, though, especially going into this fight against Hughes, who is capable of, pushing a pretty heavy grappling pace. But what I do like from Rodriguez is, I do like that she showed a bit of wrestling upside in her most recent fight, and I guess she showed it a bit on the Contender Series also. But, against Hansen, who I'd say was really her offensive wrestling that really won her the fight, because, I thought Rodriguez would look better on the feet, but, she was able to hit takedowns later in the fight, which I'd say ultimately won her the decision. So it was good to see her round out the rest of her game, but I do think she's a better boxer than she is a wrestler, I think. So she's going to be going up against Hughes, who... So Hughes is someone who I still don't think is technically that good. On the feet, I just think she's very slow and plotty. I don't think she's a great athlete. And for those reasons, I feel like I've kind of underrated her in her UFC run. I will admit to that, but she's got some, great intangibles that I feel like could carry her. She's very tough. She's got good cardio. She's got nonstop pressure. She's able to push a wrestling pace in there. So, while I don't think she's the most talented or athletically gifted fighter, she is able to fight to her strength and, push a pace in there. And if fighters aren't able to keep up, she is able to just outpace them and eventually break them too. So Hughes is someone that I do think does a good job of maximizing her win condition and, fighting to her strengths. But, taking a look at this fight, though, I've been kind of back and forth on it because, on one hand, I've historically kind of underrated Hughes. She's got a great ability to just make a fight really scrappy, really dirty and grindy. But I just can't get over how bad her striking defense is. She's just way too slow and hittable on the feet. I can definitely see Rodriguez landing some pretty heavy shots on Hughes early in the fight. But I guess the question is if Rodriguez is going to be able to stuff the takedowns and work her way back up later in fights, which, she might be able to. It's kind of hard to say. Rodriguez hasn't quite faced someone who brings the sort of pace and pressure that Hughes brings. Rodriguez did look pretty good against another grappler in Hansen, but Hansen, in my opinion, is kind of physically weak, and Hansen still was able to get the better of Rodriguez in some of the earlier exchanges. Really, it was the offensive wrestling of Rodriguez that kind of won her that fight, and I don't know if that's going to be as readily available here. It might be. Hughes hasn't shown the best bottom game either, so just a number of unanswered questions on both sides, but I guess breaking this fight down, the way I kind of see it playing out is I think that first round, I think Rodriguez should be able to win. She's going to be fresh. I think Hughes does tend to start a little slower in fights sometimes. She kind of has to build into fights. So I can see Rodriguez touching Hughes up early, landing some big shots. So I do think there's a good chance we see Rodriguez take the first round. And, if Hughes is able to survive, I guess, past that first round, I do kind of favor her in the last round, the third round. Hughes historically has come on really strong in the third round. So round 1, I think, goes to Rodriguez. Round 3 goes to Hughes. So I guess the second round really is going to be the swing round, in my opinion, which, it's kind of hard to get a great read on because, we look at Hughes' fight against Estela Nunez, and she got pieced up early in the first round. She was getting pieced up early in the second round as well, but was able to start to turn it around, in the latter half of the fight. But I'd say what really swung that second round for Hughes was, her late takedown on Nunez. And, she was kind of going to town in the last 15, 20 seconds, which I felt like really put a stamp on the round. And I just don't know, how likely that is to happen again. Hughes didn't really get her wrestling and grappling going until a bit later in the second round, and any later than that, I feel like she could easily have dropped the round, and that is something I could see happening here against Rodriguez, who I feel like should have better cardio than the likes of Reed and Nunez, and with how, I guess, low volume Rodriguez can afford to be sometimes, she could definitely, stuff some shots and land some heavy shots on the feet and be able to kind of, squeak away with the round that way, but at plus 170 though, I don't think it's a terrible look to go, bet Hughes here, because I do see Hughes eventually getting her wrestling going. And I guess the question is if it's going to be enough in that second round to swing it in her favor, because I do think she wins the third round at, a pretty decent clip. So I've been going pretty back and forth on this fight, but given where the odds are at right now, I think that, Hughes plus 170 isn't a particularly bad look. So I guess I'll just go with Hughes here to win by decision. I think it'll just come down to how much success she's going to be having in the wrestling and grappling come that second round. But official pick, I guess I'll just go with Hughes by decision. And in the next fight, we have a pretty intriguing matchup between Daniel Rodriguez and Neil Magny, a fight that got put together on somewhat short notice here. Kind of made this card a lot more compelling, but taking a look at the odds, this fight is practically a pick'em, minus 115 for Magny, minus 105 for Rodriguez. So we'll start with Rodriguez first. Rodriguez, obviously, the guy's a very slick boxer. He's got a good jab, 1-2, very good combination punching, solid on the counter as well. He's got a nice body kick that he'll throw. Being a southpaw fighter, I think that'll be open in a lot of his matchups. He's got pretty solid volume and cardio. He can push a solid 3-round striking pace. He's making a somewhat quick turnaround here, which is a little concerning, but, he didn't take too much damage in his most recent fight and didn't have to cut too much weight either for his last fight. So, could be something that might not end up mattering, but, I am always a little wary of these guys making quick turnarounds. But he is going up against Neil Magny, who is a veteran of the sport at this stage, very well-rounded guy, someone who is good at distance. He uses length very well at distance. He's strong in the clinch. He can grapple, and he can also push a pace as well. Very good cardio, and historically he's just been able to outwork opponents that haven't been able to keep up. Overall, just a very solid, consistent fighter. You kind of know what you're getting with Magny. But taking a look at this fight, it is a very compelling matchup, in my opinion, one that I've kind of been going really back and forth on, because I do feel that both guys can pose issues for the other. For Magny, he historically has struggled against strikers who have good footwork, lateral movement, guys who could pressure him and kind of operate in that boxing range, which I think Rodriguez can kind of do, outside of the lateral movement. But, Rodriguez is a solid pocket boxer. But on the Rodriguez side, he hasn't really faced a smothering grappler like Magny yet. His takedown defense has looked okay in a limited sample size, but most of his fights have been against strikers. The only wrestler or pure wrestler he's really gone up against is Kevin Lee, but Lee has shown, he will slow down in fights and, isn't really able to maintain that sort of pace and pressure that he's able to put on in that first round. And Lee was actually having success early in the fight, did hit takedowns, was able to rack up control time. Even Mike Perry had a bit of success there too as well. And, Magny, not exactly a very prolific wrestler, but, he is someone who is pretty good at grinding opponents against the cage, putting his weight on them. And he is decent at actually hitting takedowns along the cage, right? He's not going to go out there and shoot blast doubles or anything, but he does have a nice single leg. He is able to get fights to the ground from the cage at a pretty good clip. So I do think that Magny will have opportunities to get fights into control positions, whether it's along the cage, whether it's in the clinch, or whether it's on the ground. And in my opinion, for Rodriguez to win, he'll have to stay off the cage. Obviously, he'll have to stuff takedowns, but you can't get caught up against the cage against someone like Magny, who is very proficient there. But the issue with Rodriguez is he's a little flat-footed. He doesn't incorporate a ton of lateral movement in his fights. We saw Max Griffin do it pretty effectively early against Magny, and was actually able to beat Magny in the striking exchanges, even drop him early. He was having success, but I think that also led to Griffin slowing down a bit, because that's not really the way he typically fights. I think he was expending a lot of energy, at least more than he's used to, just backing up and circling out, and all the movement and stuff, I think, was kind of taxing him a little bit. And we eventually saw Magny just take over in the second half of the fight, the latter half of the second round and the third round. And that's kind of just something that I see happening here in this fight also. Rodriguez, I feel, would need a little more time to properly prepare for someone like Magny. I don't know if the short training camp that he's going to have for this fight is going to be enough for him to really change up his style. And even if he was able to change it up, I don't know if he's going to be able to consistently execute it, in this fight. And if I remember correctly, I remember hearing Rodriguez saying he doesn't really game plan either. He just goes in there and looks to box with opponents, which I can definitely see happening. So, for this fight, I think I got to go with Magny here. I think that first round is going to be pretty close, pretty competitive. I feel like the boxing of Rodriguez, the hand speed, could give Magny some troubles, but I see Magny eventually, getting this fight into the grappling department, and I do think if he's able to get on top of Rodriguez, he'll have a ton of success. Kevin Lee was able to have success on top, and Magny is not going to fade away like a Kevin Lee or a Mike Perry. Neil Magny also, much, much bigger than these guys, much more experience in these control positions, much more experience going, 3 hard rounds. So yeah, I think I got to go with Magny in the spot. I think it's going to be a very competitive fight, but I think the big difference maker here is going to be the grappling edge for Magny. And something that I do want to mention is, we've seen Magny kind of fight guys similar to Rodriguez, whereas with Rodriguez, I don't think he's fought anyone really even close to the style that Magny brings to the table here. On top of that, we haven't really seen the cardio or the grappling cardio of Rodriguez tested. It did a bit against Lee, but Lee kind of fell off a cliff after the first round and a half mark. But beyond that, he hasn't really had the grappling tested too much against him, and Magny's definitely going to be able to test Rodriguez in that department. So I'm going to go with Magny here. Magny by decision. Magny's not really much of a finisher. He's definitely a decisionator, definitely one of the more risk-adverse fighters in the division. So I'll go with Magny. Magny to win by decision. And in the next fight, we have Misha Cirkunov versus Alonzo Menifield. and Menifield is the minus 220 favorite. Cirkunov is the plus 185 underdog, and this is a pretty straightforward breakdown in my opinion. Not too much to say here. Menifield, freak athlete, just an absolute powerhouse on the feet. Not the most technical guy standing, but he is very explosive, does have a ton of power. He's very physical, but doesn't really have the cardio to back it up. The chin's not great either, but he does have that equalizer in his hands. If he's able to land clean on you, he could put you out. But he's not a very skilled fighter in my opinion, and he's going up against Cirkunov, who is on a pretty bad slump. I think he's 2-6 of his last 8. 5 of those losses by finish, with the only decision loss to Jotko, who doesn't really finish anyone. But Cirkunov, he is a pretty aggressive grappler, very physical as well. Someone who will use his strength to kind of just bully opponents, rip them to the ground, and either muscle his way to submission or a ground and pound victory. But the cardio is not great for him either. He is someone who will fall apart if things don't go his way. He's going to look for the finish early, but he will wilt if the finish doesn't materialize. So definitely a kill or be killed fighter in my opinion. And this is a very binary fight. We have Menifield, who should have a pretty big advantage standing. He definitely is going to be live for the knockout. Obviously, he's got a ton of power, and Cirkunov, he has been chinned on a few occasions. That said, though, Cirkunov is going to have a pretty significant edge in the grappling department. Menifield has historically shown pretty good takedown defense, but his bottom game I think is pretty weak. So if Cirkunov is able to somehow rip him to the ground, I can definitely see Cirkunov pulling off a submission here. Cirkunov will also be the best grappler that Menifield's fought to date. But ultimately, I do think that Menifield should be the rightful favorite because a couple of reasons, actually. The fights, they do start standing, so, Menifield's going to have the advantage there, when it is standing. And two, I think the onus is on Cirkunov to hit takedowns and find the submission because, on the feet, I do think that Cirkunov is going to be pretty outgunned, and he's going to be on a bit of a timer to hit the takedown because the longer this plays out on the feet, I think the more likely he is of getting knocked out. But I do feel that the window to pull off that submission is going to be a bit more narrow for Cirkunov than, Menifield getting that knockout as well. Because if Cirkunov, is able to hit a takedown but isn't able to convert that submission, I kind of have a hard time seeing him, consistently being able to hit takedowns and getting the fight to the ground later in the fight. So yeah, I do think that window for Cirkunov is a little smaller, and if he isn't able to find the submission, I could see Menifield just knocking him out, when the fight does get back to the feet. But official pick, I think I'm still going to go the other way here with Cirkunov. I think that we see him just sell out for the takedown and the submission early, and I think he gets it because I just am really skeptical of the ground game of Menifield. I feel like he just has not been tested there whatsoever, and I do think that Cirkunov is a pretty legit grappler, especially early in the fight. And I definitely feel like there's a big enough discrepancy there that you can't really get to Menifield at minus 220, especially since most of his win condition is going to be tied into that knockout as well. But yeah, I don't know if I could really get to the minus 220 on Menifield. I feel like the only people he could be this big of a favorite over are guys like Mazarov, who have like fake records and stuff. So yeah, I would definitely wouldn't trust Menifield at this big of a favorite. But official pick, I'm going to go with Cirkunov to win by round 1 submission. I think he's able to get the fight to the ground and just completely dominate Menifield there. But honestly, I kind of like the unders for this fight. I think that both guys are kind of kill or be killed. Menifield, a very capable finisher on the feet. His ground game is terrible, so I think that Cirkunov is live for the submission. But if Cirkunov doesn't get it, I can see him getting knocked out. Cirkunov is a kill or be killed fighter for sure. So I have a pretty hard time seeing this fight go the distance. I think on the feet, Cirkunov's pretty live to get knocked out. And if he's able to hit takedowns, I think he's pretty live for a submission. So I like the fight doesn't go or the unders in this fight. But official pick, I'll go with Cirkunov to win by round 1 submission. And in the next fight, we have a pretty fun one between two flyweights in Askarov and Brandon Royval. Askarov is the minus 180 favorite. Royval's the plus 155 underdog. We'll start with the slight favorite in Askarov first. So Askarov, a very solid wrestler, a lot more traditional in his style. He's a very well-rounded fighter. I think the boxing is quite serviceable. He's got a pretty underrated kicking game also. He is predominantly a wrestler, but I'd say outside of, Kai Kara France, he hasn't really looked too out of place on the feet against most other guys. He's been able to hang on the feet against Benavidez, Pantoja, and even Elliott. These guys aren't really specialists or anything, but I do kind of rate these guys as far as their striking goes for the division. And the thing with Askarov is he does have the wrestling to fall back to. He's not going to go out there and spam like 7 or 8 takedowns. I think his striking is serviceable enough for him to not have to desperately shoot takedowns, although that really is where his strength lies. But overall, I'd say Askarov's just a very solid fighter who's able to mix in the wrestling to really open up his striking game and use his wrestling to kind of just grind out minutes as well. So overall, I just really like how well put together his game is. He's got a good skill set. And he does a pretty good job of, fighting to his strength and fighting to his style, essentially. He's got pretty solid durability and cardio. He could push that pace for 3 rounds. So I do like Askarov. I think he's a very solid fighter. And on the other side, we have Royval, who is kind of the opposite of Askarov. He's someone who is very unpredictable, someone who will kind of introduce variance into fights. Not the most technical guy on the feet or on the mat either. Pretty hittable, very wild. He's going to go in there and throw spinning attacks, elbows, jump knees. Generally, pretty low percentage moves that, if they connect, can definitely swing rounds and maybe even, end fights. But I don't know how reliable that is to go to consistently, especially at the higher levels. He's very scrambly on the ground. He's very hard to hold down and control. Very slippery there. Very good in transitions. And, he's just kind of good at making fights very chaotic, which... it's kind of worked for him so far, but I do feel that as he's starting to get that step up in competition against opponents who are a little more technical, guys that are a little more defensively sound, he's going to struggle a bit. And, I do like Royval. He's a pretty fun fighter to watch, but, the issue that I kind of have with this style is just it's honestly just kind of cheesy. And, again, it's been working for him so far, but I do have some questions as to whether or not it's going to be something he could pull off consistently at the higher level, especially since I think people are going to have more footage on him now. They're going to be a little more aware of what he brings to the table. And, I could see someone like Askarov being pretty well prepared for someone like Royval. I do think that Askarov is good enough defensively. He's a good enough, offensive wrestler and striker that, he can avoid a lot of the big flashy strikes of Royval and kind of just stay safe on the ground. Askarov did a pretty good job of, defending submission attempts from a pretty high-level grappler and submission artist in Pantoja. Obviously, they bring a different style of grappling to the table here, but I do think that Askarov should be good enough on the mat to stay safe from the wild transitions and the submission attempts from Royval. I think that Askarov's got good enough cardio that he's not going to get just completely outpaced by Royval either. So I think Askarov's going to be able to get it done here. I think he could hang on the feet with Royval. I think he can mix in the wrestling at opportune times to close out rounds, win minutes there. So I'm going to go with Askarov to win by decision. But with that being said, though, I really wouldn't hate anyone taking a shot on Royval just because he is a slight underdog here. And with the way Royval fights, the way he kind of leans into the variance, that's kind of what you want in a dog. But honestly, I would like a slightly bigger number on Royval just because I feel his style is a little reliant on Askarov slipping up in this fight. And he very well could, right? I mean, Royval could land like a spinning back elbow or back fist, catch him with something on the feet, or even like on the mat in transition or something. But I'd kind of want a better number than plus 150 or so. But yeah, I do like Askarov in the spot overall just because I feel he's the more technical fighter. I feel like his game is a little more refined. There's a little more process to his game. He's not going to be reliant on these big, like, kind of random moments, which Royval definitely can create, but I feel that Askarov's going to be in a pretty good position here to control the fight, on the feet and on the mat. So I'm going to go with Askarov. I'll take Askarov to win by decision. And in the next fight, we have Jonathan Martinez versus Cub Swanson. Martinez is the minus 175 favorite. Swanson's the plus 150 underdog. And we'll just start with him first. So Swanson, he is a veteran of the sport. The guy's very well-rounded. He's got good offensive boxing. He's got great jiu-jitsu. He's coming off of a knockout win over Elkins where he looked sharp. And before that, he looked good against Pineda. Did get liver kicked by Giga Chikadze, but not something you could take too much from. That's something that could shut a lot of guys down. And that fight ended pretty quickly, so it was hard to really take too much from that. But yeah, the thing with Swanson is he is getting a bit up there in age. The skills definitely are still there, and he still does look pretty good, at least as of his most recent fights. But I do feel some of the signs are there of a decline, and him moving down to 135 for this fight is a bit concerning. He's going up against Martinez, who is a pretty solid striker, a very kick-heavy fighter, someone who will attack the legs, attack the body, just does a great job of doing attritional work with it. He'll look to set up the head kick. He does have pretty good timing on the knee up the middle. But the thing with Martinez is he's just not someone I fully trust just yet. One, I think his chin is a little suspect. Obviously, he got knocked out by Grant. Perez had him shaken up a bit also. And overall, I feel like his level of competition is still quite weak. He's on a nice little run recently, but I really don't rate these guys all that much. Guys like Morales and Perez, not terrible fighters by any means, but I would consider them a bit more of like lower end gatekeepers, guys who probably are UFC caliber, but they're probably going to lose a lot of fights to guys on the come up. They'll beat guys who are maybe like contender series level. And, Martinez is not exactly like blowing them out of the water either, right? So I do think Martinez is a solid fighter, a decent fighter, but I do think we kind of have an idea of where his ceiling's capped. You look at some of his losses, he's got losses to guys like Matt Schnell, who Matt Schnell is a solid fighter who's, I guess, perennially in the top 15, albeit a little, inconsistent. But yeah, he does have a loss to Matt Schnell. He's got a loss to Andre Sukumtat, Andre Ewell as well. That was a very close fight. A lot of people thought that he probably should have won that fight, but at the end of the day, this is Andre Ewell we're talking about, and I don't know if you should really be fighting this close to a guy like Andre Ewell, right? And he does have a loss to Davey Grant as well. So, look, Martinez, again, solid fighter, but I do think that we have an idea of where his ceiling is at in this division. And, I guess the big thing is, skill for skill. I do think that Cub is the better fighter. Obviously, I think a prime Cub would absolutely destroy Martinez, but this isn't a prime Cub we're talking about. This is a 38-year-old Cub Swanson who, is making his move down to 135, who's also had a career chock full of injuries. He had that ACL tear not too long ago. I don't know if this is him or if this was someone else recently, but I think he may have had like a broken hand as well. So, the injuries are piling up. The guy's getting a bit up there in age. He's moving down to 135. Just a ton of red flags on the Cub Swanson side. Even though I'm not super high on Martinez myself, I do think he's got some pretty solid tools here to succeed. He's got a very nice little calf kick, which we did see Cub really struggle with against Pineda. I think it's very clear the effect the ACL tear has kind of had on him. And honestly, I just don't think the wins that Cubs had recently are going to age really well. He did beat Darren Elkins, who Elkins is a pretty gritty wrestler, but, the guy's a punching bag on the feet. Daniel Pineda, who honestly has looked like dog shit since coming back from, the PED suspension, did have a win against Herbert Burns, but Burns, as we all know, is a pretty bad gasser. But, Pineda just has looked horrendous since coming back from that. He was getting pieced up by Swanson, getting pieced up by Feely. And I know a big talking point in a lot of Feely breakdowns are just how he's looked career best against Pineda. But I think in hindsight, it's pretty safe to say that Pineda's kind of washed. And then prior to that, Cub did have a win against Kron Gracie. But, Gracie, obviously more of a grappler, still very green in his MMA career and still very inactive. But, Cub was able to do work there. But, these are wins that I just don't really think are going to age well. But look, Cub, he is a legend of the game. I think he's a very solid fighter. Skill for skill, I do think he's going to be the better fighter here. But, again, he is getting into the twilight of his career. I feel like, all the injuries, the age is going to catch up to him. I think the weight cut is really going to, diminish him a bit. I don't know if it's going to, mess with his speed, his cardio, or his durability, or maybe even all three. But I do think the weight cut is going to mess him up a bit. But as far as, how this fight is going to play out, I think the kicks of Martinez are going to be a big thing. I really do think the leg kicks are going to get to Cub here, and Cub is going to have to, force something here. He could definitely catch Martinez. If the speed of Cub is still on point, if the power translate, I could definitely see him landing a bob on Martinez, since Martinez does have a pretty suspect chin. He has been cracked in there before, and Cub is a pretty heavy hitter. And I suspect that at 135, he is going to be able to maintain some of that power. But ultimately, I do think that Martinez is going to be the one that's going to catch Cub Swanson here. I might be putting too much stock into the weight cut, but I do think that's going to have a pretty detrimental effect on him. But look, if it doesn't, I do think that Cub is pretty live here. But historically, these late move downs in weight just have not really worked out for these older guys. And, that cut to 145 to 135, I think is a pretty big cut as well. So I'm going to go with Martinez to win by round 2 knockout. I kind of like the unders in this fight also. Martinez, again, doesn't have the best durability. And, Cub moving down, I think could mess with his durability a bit too. So I'm going to go with Martinez to win by round 2 knockout. But I do kind of like violence in this fight also. And in the main event, we have Viviane Araujo versus Alexa Grasso. And Grasso is going to be the minus 180 favorite. Araujo is the plus 155 underdog. And we'll start with the dog in Araujo first. So Araujo coming off of a career best performance, in my opinion, against Andre Ali. And I have always felt that Araujo is just a pretty solid fighter, someone who's very well-rounded. But I did have, some concerns with her going into her most recent fight, namely the cardio. But as far as what she does do well, Araujo, she is a pretty good striker. She's got good power. Can be a little low volume at times, just throwing singular strikes out there. Kind of just one and done a lot of the time. But, she does throw with a bit of power. She can wrestle. I think she's a solid grappler. But I feel like the big thing that's been holding her back really has just been the cardio. I know she put on a pretty crazy fight against Lee, pushed a pretty crazy pace there, but historically she has been someone that has slowed down a bit as fights have progressed, especially against fighters that she isn't quite able to kind of bully in there. But I will give it to her in that she looked really good last fight, came back from getting dropped by Lee, and then was able to put together 2 really dominant rounds. That said, though, I do feel like Lee is someone who does slow down a bit also. She's kind of had a history of maybe pushing too hard of a pace early and then kind of crumbling a bit later in the fight. That said, though, I do still think, Araujo is a very solid fighter who's going to be able to test Grasso in pretty much all phases, right? She's going to be able to hang in the striking, and I do think Araujo is a big enough wrestling and grappling threat to have success in that department as well. And I do feel like the wrestling is something that Araujo is going to have to mix in here because she's going up against Grasso, who is a very good boxer herself. She's got good footwork, very crisp boxing. She's quick. She could put combinations together. She's able to work in the clinch, dirty box there. And Grasso has also shown some other wrinkles to her game lately, mainly her grappling, bit of wrestling also. So I do feel that, Grasso is making improvements. She is going to be in the prime of her career. And she looks like she's really, rounding out the rest of her game also. So a win here definitely would solidify her as a pretty legit contender. But I do think that Araujo is going to be able to put on a pretty good, pretty competitive fight. On the feet, I do maybe favor Grasso on the aggregate. I think she's going to be potentially a bit quicker in there. I think the volume's going to be there for her. I like her boxing. So I gotta edge Grasso here, but, not by a massive margin, I don't think. Wrestling, got to give it to Araujo. Historically, that's kind of where Grasso has struggled. She's struggled against some pretty good wrestlers in Esparza and Suarez, but, these girls are very high-level wrestlers, and I don't think that Araujo is quite on that level, but I do think that Araujo is good enough in the striking and is a well-rounded enough fighter that she could definitely use the wrestling and mix that in to win some close rounds. But ultimately, the pick for me here is going to be Grasso, for a number of reasons. Obviously, like I mentioned before on the feet, I do favor Grasso. She's going to be the younger fighter also. And yeah, I think the main thing that really kind of pushed me over the edge was really the 5-round nature of this fight. In a 3-rounder, I would be a little more hesitant. I do think that Araujo is good enough in a 3-rounder to win at least 1 round. I did actually have in my notes that for a 3-rounder, I would consider, playing Araujo, points handicap, because I do think that she can win at least 1 round. She's probably live to win 2 rounds as well, but over the course of 5 rounds, I do struggle to see Araujo being able to put together three solid competitive rounds. So I got to go with Grasso here to win via decision. I know Grasso's pretty unproven when it comes to 5-rounders as well, but honestly, my gut feeling here is I just think that Grasso is going to be a bit more well-suited to go 5 rounds as opposed to Araujo. In a lot of the 3-rounders that I've seen them fight, I've seen Grasso, put together a pretty solid pace and not slow down too much. Looked still pretty fresh after the 3rd round. Whereas with Araujo, I've seen her slow down a lot more, especially against higher-level opponents that have been able to put up more resistance. At the end of the day, though, neither have gone 5 rounds, so it's hard to say definitively, but I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that I think Grasso is going to be more well-suited for this 5-rounder than Araujo. Araujo getting a little up there in age also, 35 years old, really that cutoff point for when the decline starts to hit. Not to say that she's washed or anything, she's looked pretty good lately, but, the age dynamic I got to give to Grasso. I think that, she's a bit on the come-up, career-wise. She's on a bit of a tear. She's starting to put it together. I feel like the confidence is going to be at an all-time high. She's filling in the division pretty well also. So I do like Grasso in this spot. I do like this fight to go the distance. And in a 5-rounder, I kind of favor Grasso to be able to win 3 of the 5 rounds. It is going to be a competitive fight, but I do think Grasso is going to get it done here. So I'm going to go with Grasso to win by decision. I'll have her winning either by 49-46 or a 48-47 decision here. And that'll do it for the breakdown. So we'll get right into the recap for the previous event in Dern versus Jan. Okay event for me. Did have a few letdown spots, but ultimately was able to come out just barely ahead. Definitely flubbed the Jotko fight, but outside of that, I feel like the overall reads weren't too bad. But kicking off the card, we had Stolyarenko versus Chandler. I did have a small poke on Stolyarenko to win by round 1 submission. That's typically how she wins. I felt that Chandler might still be green enough that Stolyarenko could catch her in something, but Chandler definitely saw that armbar coming, was able to defend it, and then get on top of Stolyarenko and just pound her out. Size difference was very noticeable in this fight, and ultimately I feel like that was kind of the deciding factor for Chandler. Once she was able to get on top of Stolyarenko, it was just way too physical for Stolyarenko, was able to just kind of pound her out. But moving along, Krzysztof Jotko, Brendan Allen. So definitely the fight that put me in the biggest hole for the night. I went pretty hard on the overs and Jotko to win by decision. Obviously didn't expect him to just get, reversed and submitted this early in the fight. Allen, obviously a very capable grappler, but Jotko historically has shown pretty good submission defense, takedown defense. So really unfortunate that, he did get reversed there and eventually submitted, but definitely kind of screwed up the night early for me, but was able to kind of dig myself out of the hole later on. So, we'll just keep it moving along. Joaquim Silva, Jesse Ronson. Ended up playing the under in this fight. Was a little surprised they set it at 2.5, honestly. I thought they'd set it at about 1.5. But obviously the take was that, both guys are going to swing leather in there. Silva, has struggled a bit against southpaws and heavy-hitting southpaws at that. Ronson is someone who does have power. But on the other side of things, Ronson, he's looked pretty shitty lately. And, I'm not ruling out a Silva knockout either because Silva does have power. And, he was able to convert the knockout. Ronson, honestly, is looking pretty terrible at this stage in his career. But we move on, talking about guys looking pretty terrible. Ilir Latifi, Alexei Oleinik. I was contemplating taking the overs in this fight, but decided to just go with Latifi by decision because if this fight's going over and it's going to decision, I kind of actually favor Latifi because Latifi historically is a wall installer, lay-in prayer, someone who's going to look to just grind you out to a decision. Obviously, I felt he would have been, maybe live for a big overhand catching Oleinik early, but Latifi's preferred method is just to lay on top of guys, which he kind of did do in this fight. Honestly, was kind of funny seeing Oleinik kind of just topple over and accept bottom position. But anyways, we move along. John Castaneda, Daniel Santos. Honestly, this was a fight I just did not have the best read on. I thought the veteranship of Castaneda would pull through, but Santos showing that he's just an absolute dog in there. Kind of Homer Simpsoned his way to a victory, which honestly is pretty legit path to victory for some of these lower level guys when, they don't know as much about their opponent. They're kind of unloading the clip a little bit early and then, find that they're not able to kind of hang as the fight progresses. Anyways, ended up putting Castaneda in like a four-legger. Obviously didn't cash, but there was another leg that busted as well. But yeah, I thought Castaneda would get it done, but Santos, through just sheer grit and determination, was able to pull off a pretty crazy comeback victory. Just an absolutely insane chin on this guy. But moving along into the main card, Mike Davis, Vyacheslav Borshev. I think I had Davis in that four-legger as well. Wasn't like super confident or anything. I did feel that the striking would be somewhat competitive. But what it came down to really was the wrestling, obviously. Borshev actually looked pretty good on the feet, but just could not stuff a takedown, could not work his way back up. Borshev just seems to lack the physicality and the cardio to keep fights standing, especially at the higher level here. So it's going to be tough picking this guy. I think he's going to do well against maybe lower level guys, but I think against guys who are even remotely athletic and can wrestle a bit, I think Borshev's probably going to struggle against. But moving along, Sadiq Youssef, Don Shainis. I was pretty close to putting a bet on Shainis, but at the end of the day, I just felt could just be a big levels fight, and definitely showed that. I mean, Youssef pulling off the early submission there. Definitely a bit of a mismatch. Not too much else to say about this fight. Harney Barcelos, Trevin Jones. So, absolute just outclass in this fight. I did feel like this could be a good buy low spot on Barcelos, but ultimately stayed away. I guess I was a little concerned of the potential decline of Barcelos and the fact that Jones, he does have some power, and at the weigh-ins he looked like the significantly bigger guy, and I felt, that was enough to kind of keep me off him. But Barcelos showing why the bookies, routinely have had him at minus 500, minus 600. The guy's just a legit fighter, very well-rounded. Just put together an absolute clinic against Jones, beat him pretty much everywhere, was touching him up on the feet, was able to hit takedowns, and was able to dominate him on top. So just an absolutely just dominant performance, Barcelos. Victor Henry stock's probably going through the roof right now, but I definitely missed my opportunity here on Barcelos. His next fight, he's going to be a pretty juiced up favorite because of this. So kind of bummed out, kind of missed out on the boat here, but it is what it is. Moving along, Randy Brown, Francisco Trinaldo, and I did have Brown anchor a couple of parlays. I just thought that, the size, the length, and the age was just too big of a factor here, and Brown looked good. Obviously, the fight IQ is still a little questionable from Brown. Definitely had his moment early to potentially, end the fight. Had Trinaldo hurt pretty bad, but just kind of let him up. Did not jump on him at all. Was really surprised to see that, if I'm being honest. But yeah, he did put together 2 solid rounds, was able to win somewhat comfortably, but the margins on this fight definitely were a bit close for comfort. If Trinaldo had gone for the takedowns or the leg kicks, or blasted the leg kicks, earlier, he could easily have won 2 rounds. So, can't say it was a great bet there, but glad that Brown was able to get it done. We'll definitely have to reconsider, betting Brown at heavy chalk, just because the guy, he likes being flashy in there and putting on a show, which it does lead to some pretty fun, exciting fights, but we'll leave openings for him to potentially drop the ball, and, can't be doing that as a minus 300 favorite here. But moving along into the main event, Mackenzie Dern, Yan Xiaonan. So obviously I did take Dern to win by submission, but ended up betting the Xiaonan money line. I mean, plus 185 I thought was pretty generous. We did see, I'd say, a pretty similar dynamic in Dern versus Rodriguez play out before, and funny enough, it ended up being a pretty similar fight also, right, where Dern, she struggled a bit that first round, was able to win that second round with the takedown and do work there on the ground. Dropped the third in the fourth round, and then I guess in this fight she did have grappling success in the fifth round as well. I think Yan just got a little careless late, was swinging for the fences when she could have just did what she was doing in that third and fourth round, fighting more composed, using her footwork to manage distance, stuffing the takedowns as opposed to swinging wild and losing her balance and losing the round that way. And I know a lot of people feel that it should have been a 10-8 round, either the second or the fourth or the fifth. Maybe even both. Although what I would argue that, she's got a much better case in the fifth than the second. I thought the second, well, Dern did have a lot of control time. It wasn't like an absolute washout there. Like, Yan did get some control time of her own in that round. She was getting off some of her offense. Whereas that fifth round, I think you can make a much better case for being a 10-8 with all the control time and damage that Dern did. But I think what ultimately may have swayed the judging at the end there was when Yan was able to reverse positions and just, go berserk for that last 10, 15 seconds, which I think may have swung it back into a 10-9. Obviously, I can see arguments made from both sides. I can't argue with either side there, but honestly, I'm just glad to be on the winning end of a controversial decision. But regardless, I do think that Jan, definitely the side money line wise, Dern definitely should not have been the side at minus 200. But one last thing I wanted to say, a lot of people are going to look at this Dern fight and say she really needs to work on her wrestling and such, which I don't disagree with. I do think that Dern needs to improve her wrestling, have a more reliable way to get fights to the ground. But I think one thing that people are kind of overlooking from that fight is just how bad the cardio of Dern looked. Like, she looked completely gassed after that second round. Wasn't able to really convert any of her takedowns in that third and fourth round. Was kind of a sitting duck out there. She was eating some big shots from Jan. And I know she did kind of come back in that fifth round, but I feel like that was more so Jan kind of slipping up. I feel that if Jan had fought a little more composed like she was doing in that third and fourth round, she would have probably continued to just piece up Dern on the feet. So while I do think the wrestling is going to help her, I just feel the cardio is probably a bigger issue for Dern. Even if she is able to reliably get fights to the ground, I just have some doubts as to whether or not Dern's a 5-round fighter. And, even if her wrestling did improve, I don't know if her cardio is going to be good enough for her to get 3 rounds of, top control time. We saw her barely be able to get 2. Most fights she's only able to get 1. So I think that's a bigger concern going forward. But maybe it's a part of her game she can improve. I don't know. Would be interested to see. But, I do have some doubts going forward as to whether or not Dern's a 5-round fighter. But honestly, pretty solid card overall. Ended up having a lot of fun on this card. A lot of good fights. And ended up barely coming out ahead. Well, actually, I think I ended up on a slight loss because of Bellator, which I did have a small 0.3 unit bet on Carlisle. Obviously, the guy's an absolute wild man. He is someone who will go out there and maximize his win condition, which he kind of did early. Obviously, wasn't able to convert, but that's all you can really ask for a plus 300 something underdog. And honestly, I was a little surprised that they gave McKee Carlisle, especially in his first fight up at that weight class. I don't think Carlisle's like elite or anything, but I do think he's kind of underrated. Anyways, I just took a small shot on him. But speaking of Bellator, I don't know if anyone saw the Aaron Pico fight. I don't know what the hell their corner was doing at the end there. No idea why they didn't call in a doctor right away. I feel like they kind of just assumed that Pico had a dislocated shoulder, and even if he did, I don't know if the way they were kind of yanking his arm was the right way to relocate his shoulder. Now, obviously, I'm not a doctor, so I don't really know anything about this, but if anyone else does, feel free to leave a comment, and just let me know the proper way of doing it. But, with how they were pulling on it, it kind of looked like they may have made it worse, but who knows? Anyways, that'll do it for this episode of the podcast. We got another couple of weeks off, and then we have a pretty stacked pay-per-view card. Number of good fight night cards coming up, too, actually. And then another very stacked UFC 281. So we got a lot of good cards lined up to close out the year. Hopefully we could make a little money on the way, too. Close out the year with a nice little run. But in the meantime, I guess best of luck with your guys' bets. Hope you guys found this information useful. And, don't forget to like and subscribe, obviously.